Everybody, I'm super excited to be here. I am Morgan. I'm the lead user researcher here at User Interviews. Today, I've got some awesome panelists with me who are going to talk all about how research ops can really help be like the fertilizer for scaling your research practices and data and just creating more data-driven decision making in your company. So a really meaty topic to get into. Also want to say just like thanks to Ben, thanks to Jackie, everyone behind the scenes making this happen. And then thanks to everybody who joined today. I think we've had some just really fun conversations throughout the day. So it's been a really, really exciting conference. I'm just so excited you could join us today. Earlier, Roberta mentioned in the career paths conversation a little bit about how people have different career journeys, and everyone sort of has their own way of getting into the industry. So rather than sort of like doing intros for everyone here, I actually want to use our first question as people sort of intro to you all. So our first question is really around for each of our panelists. We'd love it if you could just share a little bit about sort of the path that you took, briefly just to get into your current role, and maybe also tell everyone your current role and title and where you're at. And I'll kick it over to Kelly to start, and then we'll go from there.
Oh, absolutely. Really happy to be here. And thank you so much, Morgan and Ben, for inviting me. I am Kelly Clausen. I am a research operations lead at Rocket Mortgage. And I will say that there have been no straight lines in my path to research operations. I think the one unifying thread throughout my career has been research. And so I actually started off working in government, working as a social demographer, doing a lot of work with census data, with the public use microdata sample data, doing a lot of small area spatial analysis in ArcGIS. And really digging into the numbers. And that actually eventually led to me learning a little bit more about, there was an aha moment where I said, oh my goodness, all of these numbers that we see in census data and that we see in all of these wonderful tables for to talk about our residents and our citizens, these are all people. And so I started working with Code for America and really digging into the real user experience of government services, and particularly digital government services. And that led me back over to the University of Minnesota and working with the University of Minnesota Design Center in service design. And that led me into a whole host of different verticals. And so I have now worked in user research, competitive intelligence, market research, in CPG, healthcare, in addition to government, as well as financial services. As well as at a digital consultancy. And throughout my career, throughout all of these years of being a researcher, I was always that researcher who was the person who was like taking care of the tools and making sure our SPSS licenses were up to date and ensuring that we were keeping track of our Qualtrics completes and how many we had available, and reaching out to folks to ask them whether they wanted to talk to us about how different services were working for them. So I was always kind of doing that. And as I stepped into a role at a digital consultancy that had a very small research team and really no research operations practice, that I started doing that exact same thing, because we came to the realization, boy, it would be really great if we had some way of like looking at some of our past reports and understanding what we had said before, understanding some of our previous insights, and sort of launching from the top of the hills rather than the bottom of the valley. We thought about centralizing tooling, as well as thinking about things like democratization. And so there I was doing this again. And then I was there and I actually ran into Kate's article on Medium. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like an actual thing. This is like research operations. That's what I'm doing. And so my role at Rocket is actually the first time I've had an opportunity to dedicate myself to research operations full time. Just absolutely love it. It is absolutely a delight. I work with an amazingly strong, gifted, talented team of researchers and helping them to enhance their velocity and infuse human insight across all of our products and services at Rocket.
Love it. Such a great journey. Nicole, why don't we have you go next and share your role and your journey to where you are now?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My background is not as varied or as exciting as Kelly's, but also somewhat different in the sense that I started off in nonprofit world. I actually started recruiting job coaches for a nonprofit that worked with adults and children with developmental disabilities. And then that segued into working at Sloan Kettering in New York, where I was recruiting the bench research scientists. And somehow I talked my way into tech. I landed at Facebook, where I was brought in to basically build out the PhD and postdoc recruiting programs. I did that for, I don't know, like 2-3 years. And then I made the transition into research programs. And I was working on a lot of external communications, community building, and also trying to help our new hires find a place within all the different teams that we had then. And now I am at Slack. I've been here for 5 years. So I lead our research programs as well as our research ops. It's a it's a lot of different hats every day, but I absolutely love it and I couldn't ask for a better job.
Yes, wearing a lot of hats can be it can be tough, but it's also it keeps things interesting. It keeps things varied. Hannah, let's go over to you to hear a little bit about your journey to where you are now.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you all for having me. I'm Hannah Barbosa. I lead research operations at AWS for the centralized research team. I started my journey in research actually on the agency side. I started working in what you would kind of call like a custom house, leading and supporting a lot of foundational research. Really really love that work, especially looking back at the work that I've done since then. But if any of you are on the agency side, then you know that you do all this great work and then you send it off, and sometimes you never hear anything about it ever again. So I transitioned over to corporate to kind of be part of that, like, so what now what conversation, just to have that connection with stakeholders and see my insights through to the end. Um, when I transitioned over to corporate, um, it was, I think it was for the best, but there was definitely some challenges in terms of getting my insights to land with stakeholders and working with them in this new way, right? And so I had a mentor at the time who was leading a program manager team, and she suggested to me, like, I think some of the struggles that you're coming up against could be solved by adding in mechanisms, by really looking at programs and maybe implementing more of like a programmatic approach to your research. Um, so if any of you are researchers without operations teammates, you know that you are also an operations person. So I started to really lean into my ops side and the ops work that I was doing, and I found a real love for it. Fun fact, I tried to actually get my role converted from a researcher to an ops person at that organization, and it was denied. So I ended up leaving and moving into tech. I joined Amazon to actually lead a democratized research process. That very quickly went away as they needed a research team, and I moved back into research and research management. And then, like almost 2 years ago, transitioned over to AWS to lead the operations team here. So, no straight path, as I think many ops folks have, but it's definitely been exciting. And I think it's been ops is, I love it. It's where I want to be. So,
I just
that's me.
thank you all for sharing. It's just, I think it's really interesting for folks to hear those career journeys because it really does show like what you all are saying. There's no one path into everyone's role. I started out in academia myself. Nicole, I feel like you were the one who said you talked your way into tech. I think I did a bit of the same thing. My first tech role was in an agency, Hannah, just like you. So it's like there's similarities in people's journeys, but no one journey is the same, which I think is really interesting. All right, so now I want to transition a bit and I want to get into the meat and potatoes of what our topic for today. So definitions are important, right, in any role. And today we're really talking about like how research ops can help people sort of scale their research impact. So I'd really love to hear from each of you, like, what does scaling research mean to you and what strategies are you using to scale? Nicole, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Definitions are important. So for me, when I think about scaling research, I selfishly think about myself and my role. I personally prioritize my own toolbox in order to build my own efficiencies, which ends up freeing more of my time to unblock others. So in my toolbox, I rely heavily on text expander for a lot of like frequent forms or things that I'm constantly like having to type out or explain in text. I drop it into text expander. I spend time building out workflows. Like sometimes it seems kind of like counterintuitive to spend so much time building these things out. But I know in the end that the time spent doing that work up front saves me so much time down the road. And the same thing can be said for templates. People continuously ask for the same thing, or you realize that there's some pieces missing because people are using different repositories or different things to store information. And last but not least, I don't know what I would do without my Asana. You guys have heard me talk about this. I think somebody's Asana, Hannah, was that you? Like somebody's Asana wasn't working the day that we spoke, and I don't know what I would do if that happened to me. So yeah, I have to contain the madness that sometimes happens within the world of ops. You're constantly being pulled in different directions. You have constant programs that you're iterating on because things never stay stagnant. And so by focusing on how I can best go about my day, that is how I'm better able to scale research for others.
So what's interesting that I'm hearing there is not only are you thinking about how am I making things more efficient for everybody else in their workflows, but also how do I myself like be efficient in the workflows? So kind of meta there in terms of how you're approaching that. And I'm also kind of hearing some people bring up the word efficiency and kind of speeding things up, even in our intro. So there's definitely a theme coming up here. Kelly, curious sort of what scaling research means to you and what strategies you're using.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So I tend to wax poetic and a little philosophical on all of this, y'all. So just sort of hang with me here for a second. But basically, I kind of view this through the lens of that. And I say this all the time, infusing human insight into every decision, right? Into every product decision, into every design decision. We want to have that human insight. And with research operations, what we're trying to do is we're trying to expand access to insights, and we are also trying to increase velocity to insight, right? Because the faster that we can come up with really good insights, the better that we can create really great products that actually meet human needs. So that to me is what really scaling insight actually means. And so when I think about that, in a lot of ways, if research ops is working well, it actually sort of feels to your team like nothing is happening at all. Everyone just has access to the sample that they need. They have access to the tools that they need to run their research. They have access to previous reports in the repository that give them that desk reference that help them to understand what happened before, where they're at now, and what new questions they might need to answer. They might not even need to do research because they might have already done this study just a few months ago. So when we think about that, we think about scaling research. What are some of those things that we can do to really scale from a research ops perspective? So, and I think Nicole mentioned a couple of those as well when she was speaking. So some of those things like having those access to tooling, having those templates available for folks to use. So it's literally a plug and play as people are doing things. But, and then thinking about sort of like, how do we push those insights out into the organization, really democratize the insights that our research team might be a very, very small part of our organization, but we can expand their scale by giving everyone access to the amazing findings and the amazing research that they're doing so that we can create a taxonomy. And we also can create better access to those insights and to focusing those insights in at the right moment for the right decision by having a really well-formulated taxonomy. So, which is absolutely an ongoing process to ensure that you're fine-tuning that. So that's what scaling means to me.
There's two things that are coming in my mind as you talk about this. So you mentioned how like if you have a strong sort of operation structure, it feels like maybe nothing's kind of happening at all, right? Things are sort of in autopilot. I'm almost thinking of like a car. Like I don't need to know all of sort of the like happenings going on in my car, all the mechanics of it, but it just needs to get me from like point A to point B, right? And so like a smooth operations team is kind of like that for research, right? It's like the vehicle to get you there, even if you don't know all the ins and outs of sort of how, like what's happening in the engine or what have you. So that's popping up for me. And then this other piece about sort of, you're enhancing velocity and also access to the insights, and you're putting in these processes. You all mentioned templates and sort of different sort of automations. And I'm thinking about this term. We had a fireside chat a year or so ago with Brad Arago, who's a really great research ops lead. And he mentioned sort of the term dry, don't repeat yourself. I think it's big in sort of the eng world. And I think that's sort of what operations allows you to do in terms of like scaling your resources is it helps you not sort of repeat things over and over again and keep reinventing the wheel. Hannah, would love to hear sort of about what scaling research means to you and what you're doing.
Yeah, super interesting. I've never heard the dry, don't repeat yourself, but now I feel the need to like Google it deeply and read some subreddits or something on it. Um, so totally plus one to what Kelly and Nicole shared. I feel like it's definitely twofold, right? It's like tactical and strategic. Um, I feel like we hear so much, especially lately, about doing more with less. And are you talking to more customers? And are you conducting more studies? And while I think some of that might be like a metric or a measurement that we use to really define whether or not we are driving research or scaling research, I think it's bigger than that, right? Like at the strategic level, ops is very uniquely positioned to see across the organization. I think Kevin just dropped a comment about this in the chat. And ops has the ability to really look at like, okay, what are the problems that we're seeing across our different researchers or research teams? How can we help solve those? Is it a new system? Is it stronger taxonomy across these teams? Whatever it might be. And then maybe at like the tactical level, it is we are building out this template and we are rolling this template out. So I think it goes hand in hand. It has to be both. You have to be able to see the bigger picture while also realizing like what are those more tactical or just sort of task driven things to help you accomplish that bigger picture or address the issue that might be coming up.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I'm curious to hear a little bit more from each of you. So you've shared all of these great strategies and all of these ways that you're like what scaling research means, what you're doing to sort of scale research. And anytime I hear research operations people talk, I think, wow, they're doing so much, but then it makes me think like, okay, there's probably other things they thought about doing or thought about incorporating that they had to deprioritize just because there's not enough people or not enough time in the day, right? So I'd love to hear a little bit about like how do you figure out or how do you prioritize what to scale? How did you determine which strategies to use or where you wanted to tap into? Anybody feel free to jump in who feels like they have a thought here.
I can kick us off. The first thing that kind of always comes to mind is what is going to stop research from happening? What are the things that have the ability to completely block our researchers and research efforts? A lot of times that's recruitment. That's big in the B2B world. That's definitely one of the first things I think about. I think too, as operations, like whenever I first transitioned into the role, I definitely was like, we've got to do everything and ops should own this and we should do that. And I think as I've kind of grown in this role and continue to lean in on my team, it's less about doing everything and it's more about doing the right things. And one of the ways that we're looking into that is what's something that only ops can do? Like what are the things that we need the ops perspective to be able to address this issue? Where do we bring people in that maybe might have more of a specialization or more of a narrow view to get their opinion and get their feedback while we're still addressing the bigger picture? Those are a couple of things. I feel like I have more to say on that, so maybe I'll jump back in later, but I'll hand it over to Nicole and Kelly.
No worries, no worries. It's an ongoing conversation. Kelly, I feel like you looked like you were about to jump in.
because I want to just second voice what Hannah just said, as well as also just bring up, what you said, Morgan, in that I have to say that across the board, every time I have a conversation with an ops person, it's really, they are absolutely bringing outsized value to their organizations relative to the size of their teams, right? I do not know, hands down, of any research ops team that is not doing more than the actual number of people that are actually working in research ops. So there is a huge, huge amount of impact. And when, this is sort of one of those places where I'm going to have to say, do as I say, not as I do. When you think about the pillars of research ops and all of the different pillars that you could be working in, from people to environment to organizational context to knowledge management, all of the different pillars that you could be working across, all at the exact same time, you kind of have to figure out, where am I going to stake my claim, right? Where am I going to put my stake in the sand and basically say, this is where I think I can have the most impact? And I actually can't take credit for this particular statement, but it's actually one of my team leader's statements, and he has absolutely coined it and call it a FRISM. But I say it over and over and over and again in my daily work to myself, but it's about, how do we provide value within constraints? As research operations professionals, we are always going to have constraints. Too few people, too few resources, budget constraints, all of these kinds of things, right? And so you have to kind of be able to ground yourself within and ops is an organizationally contextual practice, right? You need to fit your research operations practice within the context of your organization. So you need to kind of have your ear to the ground. You need to be kind of within the middle of that maelstrom, that swirl. I always like to talk about ops as being sort of like, you are the center of the hurricane. And researchers are having to react very, very quickly to what is happening with their teams, their design team, their product team. Product is absolutely reacting in the moment to new data and new information. And so you need to sort of be that calm, and this is definitely not my personality, so I'll just own that right now. But you need to be sort of that calm, stabilizing force that sort of is reading everything that's happening around you, and you're sort of understanding where it is that is the most important place that you can have the most visible impact at any one particular point in time. And I like to kind of relate this back to, like, let's say you're working in a hotel, right? And you're someone who cleans, you're someone who cleans the rooms in a hotel, right? That could be a very, very invisible thing. Folks come in, they leave, they go about their day. You come in, you clean things up, you tidy it up, and they come back at the end of the day and they have this very, very tidy room. And it's sort of like, it's like a service that's not even seen. And so we have this concept of the service mark, right? So, you'll see when you come back to your room that basically they've made the Kleenex into a fan. Maybe there's like a little triangle where on the toilet paper so that it's easy to pull, right? And that's been done. And there's like maybe a mint, or there's a chocolate on the pillow. But you know that something has been done, and it leaves a service mark, right? And so to a certain extent, I think that part of ops and part of the magic of ops is, how do you figure out what is that service mark? Where is that place where I can have the most impact, the most visible impact for the most number of people? And you're just going to have to kind of try to pick your battles in this regard, because trying to work across all of the different pillars all at the same time, as Hannah just noted, is really one of those sort of existential improbabilities that probably isn't going to serve you or serve your team in the end. So you really do have to sort of live that statement of value within constraints. I'd love to hear what Nicole has to say on this one.
I mean, you guys have both covered it so well. Hannah, you touched on this a little bit earlier, where, prioritizing, it's always in flux, it's always in a change. And I think it's kind of to the same thread, where having frequent conversations with your key partners, your leadership team, in making sure that you are still defining, you guys are in alignment with how ops is perceived and how ops engages with other teams. And that is a personal learning for me. It took me a while to figure out that our world is always changing. What you may have started off, like you may have been brought into a company to do X. You may have been so good at that issue has now been resolved, and there's other things that pop up. So what was like the world of ops 6 months ago is no longer the world of ops within your team now. And I find that like having that agreement that right now the current state of ops for the company, for the team, these are the biggest needs, and that helps me understand what to prioritize. So things that I was like I thought were really, really important, let's say 2 quarters ago, maybe they're deprioritized now because things have shifted and the needs for our team have changed. And that has been so hard for me to adjust to, because that means you have to say no. And saying no to certain things is not, it's a very hard skill, and I'm still learning. But knowing what your actual priorities are is so helpful in being able to push back and say, this is outside my purview. This is outside of ops. There's other teams that I can actually partner with, and you should partner with for those things. And this is what I can bring to our partnership instead. Yeah.
So there's 2 things sparking in my mind. One is Carol just hosted the previous session. It was all around sort of like impact tracking and showing sort of the impact around research. And something that came up a lot was just like, know the metrics, know the things that all the leads are talking about at the all hands, at the quarterly meetings, right? Like really know those things and get to know like what keeps your stakeholders up at night, right? I think that's what you're getting at there with some of what you're saying, Nicole, is, if you understand sort of the org and like where they're focused, what they're worried about, that helps you to then prioritize, okay, how do I align what we're doing to that? And then the other thing that you're sparking for me is that, as part of those conversations, it's not always research ops or research that's the answer, right? Like someone might come to you with a problem or something they want to do. I think it's usually something they want to do, they've heard about, and you can recognize, well, hey, like, let me ask more of the why behind this problem and really see like, what are you actually trying to get at here more than like the means or the method of how to solve it, right? So it's kind of peeling back that onion to go deeper into like, what's the source of this ask? And I think research and research operations, similarly, like my former manager, Roberta, who led a great session earlier today, she had this saying where it's like, research ops is kind of like the octopus of the org. Like we're connected to so many different teams. We're implementing things for so many different functions that we have insight into like what a lot of people are doing and a lot of things that are happening that maybe doesn't always happen. Like that communication doesn't always happen across those functions. And we can be the ones to say, actually, you need to go talk to this person, or actually so-and-so ran research or put in this process. So both of those things are popping up into my mind. I'd love to, as we sort of talked about sort of scaling research, what it means to you all, the strategies you're using to scale. Nicholas did ask a good question in the Q&A that I think maybe we could touch on as an extension of this. He wanted to hear the thoughts of like research operations when it comes to supporting research teams across different disciplines. So maybe like market research versus user research or UX research. Would love to hear if anyone has any thoughts around sort of research ops when it comes to those different functions.
Absolutely. I would love to jump in here, because we do actually have a unified research operations practice here at Rocket. And it's absolutely fantastic to have that opportunity to serve our market researchers, to serve our design researchers, and to really be able to serve our competitive researchers, and to really think across those different domains. I think Nicole or Hannah actually mentioned it, is that you have to have that cross view, right? And these the kinds of things that are needed by market researchers versus design researchers are not so terribly different, right? We still need access to sample. We still need access to tooling. We can, and in a lot of cases, what can happen is if you can combine and conquer together, you can actually create efficiencies of scale right there, right? In some of those opportunities of combining your tooling or working together on tooling or working together on samples, or, you know, different recruitment options and opportunities. Absolutely bringing together all of your research insights into one repository is like a must, right? Because it's not like siloing that. At the end of the day, you really want the people who are making the decisions to have access to the data and the information they need at the moment that they need that information to make that decision. And you don't want them to have to go hunting and pecking from this space and this space and this person's OneDrive over here and this person's Dropbox over there. You really don't want them to have to go searching in many different places to find it. You want them to have a really easily usable taxonomy and repository that they can quickly go to and quickly find those answers for themselves so that they can make those decisions in the moment.
I feel like maybe, Hannah, I might have seen you turn off your microphone. Not sure if you were going to jump in there and add something.
Yeah, I was actually going to say Kelly might be able to speak to that, so it was like perfect timing. But one thing I think to build on that too, as we think about different disciplines, I'm sorry, I think my bandwidth is not great, is supporting researchers who are aligned product or services, taking a similar approach in that way, right? Like looking for the similarities, not just the Dropbox. Oh, yeah. Yeah, sorry, lost my place. Yeah, looking across researchers that support different services. That's one of the things that we're focused on. And I feel like every single day I say the words like flexible framework. So oftentimes like identifying like what are the must-haves across the different teams, like what is the information that they have to have, or what is the way that they have to work? Like what are kind of like the blockers or the points that like points of no return, and building those into the framework so that we're not creating the process, but for this team it's slightly different, and for these researchers it's just they have to fill out this form instead. It's like building out the framework, and as we're socializing it, you're really highlighting those different pieces, like we did this way because of XYZ things, because of these blockers, and making those known and having those socialized. And sometimes that leads to addressing a bigger blocker, right? So that we can have more seamlessness. But I think it's similar, not just when you're looking at market researchers versus UX researchers or whatever. It's like, I don't know any ops people that just support one researcher. I know ops people that support multiple researchers who do different methodologies and support different product lines. So I think similar principles could.
So something that I'm hearing there is, and it's shown up in all of the strategies you've been talking about, is you all are like acting as researchers, right? You're not just research operations folks, but in sort of figuring out what processes to scale and how to make this work across different teams. You're actually sort of figuring out what are all the different teams' needs, what are they trying to do, right? You're like asking all of these different questions and then figuring out the themes across to make sure that the ops can kind of scale and fit across multiple different functions, which I think is a sign of a strong ops team, right? If they can make this sort of apply to different use cases. Another question from the Q&A that I think would be interesting to answer before we sort of move to our next pre-planned question is one from Ellen. So at what point do you think organizations kind of take that plunge and create a research operations team or function? Would love to hear if you all have any sort of thoughts on what can kind of be that driver to be the catalyst for making that investment, as Ellen so eloquently put it.
I can jump in really quickly. I don't think there's like a point of like written in the sand. I think inevitably somebody will step up and it's not their role. They weren't hired to do it. I think all of us just gravitated towards this field. Like we saw a problem. We happened to be really good at it and we kept solving more and more problems. And then we ended up making a role for ourselves. And I think from knowing other people in this field, that's kind of very similar with smaller companies where problems pop up. Somebody devotes a chunk of their time doing ops related things, building out programs. And then before you know it, they've created a job for themselves in this brand new role. And it's not like a specific time. It's, do you have enough problems that warrant somebody taking time out of their regular job to fix it? And then there you go, you have a new role.
And so, Nicole, would you say, so like people taking the role, I think that can also highlight like the importance of maybe even like other external partners too, who are recognizing there's this problem here and like backing you up. So like someone else who can be kind of like your ally at the company being like, yeah, actually I'm struggling by not having these like processes in place. So I think sort of previewing a theme that we're going to get into in a bit around sort of just relationshiping at your company. But Kelly, you were about to jump in, so please go ahead.
I absolutely don't want to interrupt because I absolutely want to second voice Nicole and Hannah on this, because if you are a researcher, you are doing research ops. Okay, you are absolutely doing research ops. Like you are doing recruitment, you are doing informed consent, you are doing all of the lovely things that come into basically, you are doing field management for your projects, right? You are absolutely doing research ops. I think that, you know, Nicole kind of hit that inflection point, and there was actually a study. It was done by, you know, a really great organization that we might all know, User Interviews, where there was actually a you actually kind of enumerated the amount of time that researchers spend on things like participant recruitment and things like that, and sort of where is that place, where is that lever, you know, that wedge that research operations can come in. And, you know, some of those research operation kinds of activities are taking up like more than a third of researchers' time. So time that researchers could be researching, they are spending on research operations activities. So I think there comes to a point in time that at a certain level of maturity on your research team and with your research scale, that organizations have this aha moment where they're like, oh my gosh, we could be doing so much more research. We could be doing so fast, much faster, so much better if we had a research operations team sort of nailing down all of these, you know, like screwing all these bolts and hitting all these nail heads for us and making sure that we had sample and we had it at the ready and we have the templates and we have all of the informed consent and the incentive guidelines and all of those wonderful things, right? So I think there's absolutely that. And then also I think organizations that have truly made a commitment to being human-centered, to putting the human who is actually going to be the user of their product, of their service, of their app, of their website, okay? When they have made that commitment, then it becomes about how do we support all of the people who need research. And that's now you're, you know, getting back to Nick's question here, now you're well beyond a research team, right? Because people who need research and people who need to know the humans that they are designing for, that they are creating products for, that they are doing anything for, all need that support. So you must have a research operation practice to scale that so that all of the humans who need research and who do research, because at that point in time, when you have made that commitment as an organization that my human is the center of my world, of my universe as a company, and everything I do is going to revolve around that human, you absolutely have to have every single person in your organization getting very close to that human. So you need to have a research operations practice to support that kind of scale in human knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of, as you all are talking, I'm thinking about times in my previous roles where like the projects where I did versus didn't have the support of someone from ops to help me, or even just, you know, ops is certainly not just recruiting. Newsflash for everybody out there. That's a big misconception, or I think used to be at least. But a lot of what sort of ops people helped me do earlier in my career was recruitment. And man, the difference between when I had someone there to help me do all that stuff and all those logistics behind recruitment, I mean, I'm talking like hours in the double digits per week, right? Saved. So absolutely agree. Just the expediting the velocity, have to have ops for that. So we've started to get a little bit into this topic, and I think it's actually kind of been a theme that I noticed came up several times today in the other sessions, is really around what Ben coins relationshiping, which I love. So there's some value in building relationships, right, with people across your org, whether it comes to tracking impact or people being an ally and advocating for your function, and also just figuring out like what do I prioritize, right? That's what we talked about earlier. So would love it if some of you could share just an example of how just knowing your organization, your team, your stakeholders made you more impactful as a research operations professional. Hannah, maybe we'll have you jump in here first.
Yes, I totally can. Gosh, how have relationships helped me provide greater impact? I think it's kind of twofold. There's a few things that come to mind. So first and foremost, I don't think of operations as a support function. I realize a lot of the work that we do is to support our researchers, but I think of it as a partnership function. So I think of it as like, we're just as invested in your study as you are. We're here to help you find the people, get the people to the right place, do the work, make sure that you have the tools in place to do the work, right? And some of that is tactical and some of that could be viewed as support, but I really think of that as a partnership, because if we're going to do that really well, we need to have a deep understanding of the struggles that you're facing, what it's like to be in front of your stakeholders, and what challenges you're facing. Maybe in like the larger org, not just with your immediate stakeholders. But then two, I also think ops is also like a step or two removed from the actual research that's being done. So we also have this opportunity to position ourselves as like this unbiased partner. Like we're in the trenches with you, right? Like we're doing all the things we can do, but we can also step away and we can be this unbiased group. Like I'm not leading the interviews, so I'm not going to take any personal offense whether you agree with the insights or not. I have this opportunity now to be like a bridge builder, right? How am I helping getting your insights into other rooms? How am I connecting the dots for you? So to Kelly's point, I think about being a human-centered design organization, and organizations that's really customer obsessed. This idea that operations is not just like enabling you to do the things, we're also thinking about the bigger picture and making sure that more people are connected to those insights and more people are connected to our customers and are like making decisions based off the work that's kind of being put out there by our researchers. Like I think about those relationships in those two ways. But yeah, would love to hear what others have to say and build upon it.
I feel you mentioned like the bridge building, the deep understanding of who you are, being that partner. What this is reminding me of is I think it was Alec in the earlier session around career trajectories who mentioned like knowing your partners well can kind of be like a make or break thing too when it happens to like how team or organizations staff their teams, or like what happens during layoffs, like building those partnerships and really showing people that you are devoted to helping them bring their impact forward, right? And really support their teams. That can be like a big thing that sort of like shakes down when push comes to shove in those situations. So it's kind of reminding me of what he said. But Nicole, Kelly, would love to hear what else you have to say about relationshiping.
One thing that I can add to the amazing things Hannah said is the relationships that you build. I think a lot of the benefits are things that are always unspoken. And by that, I mean, there's like this sense of trust that you have with partners and stakeholders where it doesn't have to be explicitly said out loud, but you can ask hard questions like, hey, I know your team has been asking for X, Y, and Z. However, we've provided you X, Y, and Z, and yet you're not using X, Y, and Z. Like, what's going on? I find that these relationships, like building these strong relationships, to the point where they look at you as a trusted partner, really allows you to be more deliberate in how you spend your own resources. By that, I mean like time. And I keep going back to this example of like a team asking for a certain thing, and your team runs the research, and yet somehow the findings are never actioned on, or the reports just kind of sit somewhere. And it turns out that they didn't really understand how to translate the findings, because it was such a new area of research for them and such a new population that they were working with. And that didn't click until we had these conversations that, oh, I think we need more education around what these findings mean. I would say that that's really like the best example that I have of like having a strong relationship helps you figure out like the core issue of a lot of your problems.
Yeah, it's the trust piece you mentioned. It's when you build trust, people feel comfortable, like you said, having those difficult conversations or asking more of those difficult questions or giving that feedback of like, I don't really understand the insights, or I'm not sure how to translate them to what you were saying, Nicole, right? Like if you've built that solid trust and relationship, people feel more comfortable, I think, to have those conversations that then in the end usually make things more effective. But Kelly, I see, what else do you have to add there?
Well, I told you all this was going to be a love fest here in this panel, but here it is. So just as Hannah and Nicole basically said, and I just want to give a couple of examples of sort of exactly what they're talking about in terms of becoming that trusted partner. Honestly, I don't know how you can really be effective at scaling research, at being a really good research operations professional, if you aren't able to build those really great relationships with folks. And because, you know, as a research operations professional, you are not creating the informed consent and the non-disclosure agreement. You are working with your legal team partners to put that together. And when you work closely with your legal team, and your legal team knows you're going to come to them and you're going to raise issues and you're going to raise awareness and raise concerns, they begin to look at you and say, hey, this person is really trying to do the right thing. They're trying to ensure that we are abiding by all of the best standards here in our organization when we're doing research, right? And then they are going to be more open to having those hard conversations with you about those tough projects that otherwise they would have basically just said, no, too risky, right off, right? So those are those kinds of relationships. Your information security and your procurement team, these are folks that you need to have as your best friends, like especially on your tooling and your vendor contracts and things like that. Oh my gosh, your procurement manager, you should be like, you know, talking sports with them on Teams and in your text messages on a regular basis, because, you know, there's sort of that good cop, bad cop that you can also do to help you to basically do the right thing for your organization. If you want to build a panel, boy, you better be able to have a really good relationship with your client ops team, because you are going to have to depend on them to help you, right? Again, and then just thinking about that also with your researchers, right? I do consider my researchers my customers. They are my clients, right? I am there to absolutely provide them with services that actually help them to get their work done on a daily basis. But I'm also building a partnership with them because, as Hannah pointed out, I want to further their research. I want to scale their research across the organization. I want to know what kinds of cool things they're coming up with. So the next time I'm in a room and someone says, hey, does anybody know anything about this? I can say, hey, you know, my researcher just finished a study on that. It's in the repo. Why don't you go take a look at it? And I can just pop a little link right on into our Teams chat about it. So in all of those different ways, you really do need to have those relationships. Those relationships become a force multiplier for you. As Hannah and Nicole just said, across your organization as you're working to scale.
So, and I think all of this is right? And I really do think this has been such a key theme throughout all of the conversations today. Because ultimately, like at any company, you are a team, right? Like every function is there because they're a subject matter expert, but then you have to be rowing together, right? Or working together in order to get things done. So we talked about like the importance of that, the things that come from that. I wonder if there's like a specific strategy or something that's worked well for you in building those relationships. I know earlier today, one of the other panelists mentioned like changing their team meetings to be 45 minutes from 30, and just like knowing they were going to spend that first 10 to 15 minutes just like chatting about non-work stuff to sort of help build those like deeper relationships beyond sort of the professional. But I wonder if any of you have like specific strategies that you use to sort of actually build those relationships.
I have a couple things. One thing to also build upon what Kelly and Nicole shared, just in terms of building relationships. I feel like one relationship that we forget to build or don't always prioritize because it might feel scary or awkward or whatever is our relationships with leadership. Like thinking about like research leadership, UX leadership, design. It's just such a great opportunity because again, we're coming as this sort of like unbiased, we're here to solve the problems. We're here to be the guide through the storm, right? Coming back to what you shared earlier, Kelly. But a couple of things that I think have been super helpful in building relationships is just one, this willingness to listen. So coming from a researcher background and listening, right, and learning as a way to make a living, continuing to apply that here, right? If I'm a researcher and I'm just trying to conduct this study, but I can't get legal to sign off on this, like messaging or whatever it is that I need to do to find the people, like that level of frustration, like coming and just being an open, like, I'm here to listen, like, let's share it with me, let's get it out there. Something else that recently, an old manager of mine did this, and I think it was really helpful. And we just started implementing it on my team this year. So TBD on like long-term impact for this team. But on my last team, we had this meeting called Fridays are for reflection. And every Friday we would take an hour and we would just talk about our wins and our lessons for the week. And so instead of, in some ways it felt like therapy, in some ways it felt like an opportunity to celebrate ourselves. Our teammates know exactly what we are dealing with, or if not exactly, they can at least relate. And so having those moments where we're talking about our wins, we're talking about our lessons, maybe we're just sharing frustrations and we need to vent for a moment. I found that it's really helpful in starting to build trust and create a safe space. And the way that we've done that on my team is we've started by basically selecting topics of interest for our team, and we don't record these meetings. No one's taking notes. We take turn who facilitates them. It's a really nice way for us to kind of build stronger bonds. So give that a try. Take a Friday and have some.
That I love that. I'm already thinking, ooh, how can I implement that in my work? Kelly, you're about to jump in.
Well, I'm absolutely going to hop right on what Hannah just said and basically say, how are you hearing what it is that is top of mind for your partners? How are you listening to what their concerns are? What are the things that are keeping them up at night? And this goes for, if it's your InfoSec team, if it's your legal team, if it's your procurement team, right? And then how are you aligning your practice with those things? Right? So if, your legal team is really worrying about something, how are you addressing that at scale across the practice, right? To ensure that your research processes and strategies are aligned to addressing that need for your legal team, so that the next time you're talking to them, you're like, so how is that thing going that, was kind of bothering you the last time we spoke? And they're like, I haven't heard a thing about that. That seems to have really resolved itself. And you're like, yeah, glad, we did this, we did this. I'm glad that kind of worked out. When you're talking with your procurement people, I'm cheap. Are we RFPing this thing? I want an RFP because we're going to be cheap on this, right? So how are you aligning what you're doing in your practice to scale research in research operations with those partners? And then again, yes, with your leadership, how are you tuning in, right? Where do you have your ear to the ground, right? And how are you finding out what are those things? Again, research operation is contextually specific to your organizational milieu. And if your leaders are concerned about something, if there's a lot of talk about, well, we need this research, but we can never find people, pay attention to that. That's one of those service marks, right? That's where you can put your stake in the sand, get on it immediately. And then let your leader know, hey, guess what? I've got a panel. You'll never have to worry about that again. So these are some of those things that you can do, I think, that really do demonstrate that impact, as well as actually get to that point of like creating those relationships and driving scale.
I love that we keep bringing back the service mark terminology. I think it's so great. Purely in the interest of time, I am going to move us on to one final question here before we get to some of the Q&A stuff. Seems like there's a lot about repositories in there, so I want to make sure we have time to get to that. Nicole, I'm going to throw this question to you. I think, to go back to something I mentioned earlier, ops people are doing a lot. Oftentimes you can be asked to scale without necessarily getting more resources or headcount, right? So curious if you have any sort of like tips, tricks, advice for ops pros to protect them from overextension that can so often lead to burnout.
Yeah, I touched on this a little bit earlier about alignment on your role as an ops team or as an ops practitioner. Regardless of what your job title is, research program manager, ops, whatever, researcher, whatever it might be, the output that you are ultimately responsible for will change. And it's not always going to remain the same month over month, quarter over quarter. So have like a quarterly conversation with your key stakeholders, with your research leadership, just to get an agreement and align on this is what we said is the scope of like my practice or the team's practice and responsibilities. Yes, no. And you could build that into your road mapping, your quarterly road mapping. Just a quick check-in, like this is still like what we're ultimately responsible for. Like your goals quarter over quarter, that's going to change. But until you're having a specific conversation about the scope of your role as well, does that mean that all of those expectations are just getting compounded for, like quarter over quarter? Like that's not fair to you and your time. So make sure you have those conversations and you have a clear agreement on this is what we're going to be focused on for the current state of my role, of my team.
Yeah, it's having those conversations and going back to that scope, taking me back to my agency days when like scoping and what was defined in the project brief was so key. And also it's just, as more asks come up, it's okay, well, how do we right size this, right? Maybe we can't go all in on this one thing, but we can do part of it here, right? There's obviously always going to be some trade-offs as part of that conversation. Kelly, Hannah, any quick thoughts to add before we get into our repository questions?
Oh, well, I'm going to return to my constant mantra, which is value within constraints. And I actually think that the person who trademarked that statement is in our audience today, Fred Beecher. But so that is actually a trademarked prism, as we call it, but value within constraints. And then, as I said before, how is your organization defining success? What does success look like to your organization? Think about those priorities, because that's where you really want to align your activities. There's always going to be more to do than you've got people or have yourself to actually do them. So you'll try to figure out where it is that the winds are blowing within your organization. What are those leaders, as Hannah brought up, what are those leaders concerned about? What is keeping them up at night? And align your practice to hitting those things first. There's always going to be more that you would like to do. I literally like, oh my gosh, I didn't get this one, I get this one, I get this one. But you have to remember value within constraints. I'm going to continue to demonstrate value through this research operations practice every single day, even if I didn't get to everything I absolutely wanted to get to today.
Love it. That is a great mantra to live by. Okay, so I want to make sure we get to one of the Q&As at least about, because it seems like repositories are a hot topic in here. So, question, people would like to hear a little bit more about research repositories. How can you make that a repository accessible to the whole organization? And as maybe some of you answer that, maybe some tools or platforms that you've particularly enjoyed as part of a repository.
I can quickly
Go
chime
for
in.
it.
So as a reminder, I work at Slack. So this is a plug for Slack. We actually use Slack to house our research findings. And we built out a workflow. So anybody who completes a study uses this workflow, inputs a couple pieces of the key findings, link to their report, and that gets sent to a channel that is just dedicated to research findings. So regardless of where you are in the company, you can always go into that channel, find the latest findings, latest reports. It's searchable. And then those findings are also logged into a list of all the reports with the links, with the key findings by like pillar, by team, by researcher. So we made Slack kind of work for us. It's not a very fancy repository. It's not the most advanced, but it works for our needs.
Can I just applaud that, or Hannah?
I'm happy to share how we built that workflow with you, Kelly.
That's absolutely beautiful. And I think that's sort of like one of my very first, like, off the top takeaways is assess your budget, right? Assess your team, figure out where you're at with regard to whether or not you have the ability to pay for a repository solution, or whether you need to build it in-house. But if you have, the question was, how do you make it accessible to everyone? If you have a tool, i.e. Slack, that is absolutely available to everyone and that is going to be functional for you in building a repository, oh my gosh, please use it. Please use it. I have actually created repositories. I have created repositories in a Google folder structure, okay? And it was functional. I have created it in SharePoint. Not actually my finest hour. Just gonna completely own that, okay? So there are a lot of different ways that you can do low cost, no cost repositorying. Creating a repository, okay? Then of course you also have your like full service, roundabout suite of repository kinds of things, where you've got like your dovetails or condensed your notions, those kinds of things. But that's another discussion in terms of whether you want to pay for that, but you can also make it universally accessible in that way. But take a look at what you have available to you right now at your organization that every single team member has an in on this. Okay, that's right for taking a look at whether or not that's a potential repository solution for you. And just to Nicole and the Slack team for bringing that on board and creating such a neat tool. I do want to know about it more.
And I think just a quick note to that, it sounds like our tool is internally built, but one of the things as I think about like our repository and like the struggles that we're facing with it right now, it's like that adoption. Are people using it? Are people going to it? Are they referencing it? Are researchers adding reports to it? Are they adding reports to it in the right way? So as you kind of evaluate your tool, also think about like, what are your processes and programs around that? I love this idea from Nicole that like, hey, everyone's already on Slack, so we're going to use a tool where people are. We're going to meet people where they are. And +1 to, I think you said that too, Kelly. So I think that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like,
I'm sorry.
No, go for it, Kelly, go for it.
Okay, so you all have heard about heard the term technological debt. Oh my gosh, Hannah just brought it up with regard to your repository, right? Think about governance. Think about your research operational debt that you are creating in your repository, because you are going to need to govern that no matter what, because folks are going to upload things. They're going to upload them in the wrong way. They're going to upload them the way that they want to, or might think they should upload different things. They might tag them. They might tag them in a way that you didn't think that they were going to tag them. Even if you have created an entire lexicon for your taxonomy, that is still going to happen. Things are not going to get put into the repository, and you're going to find them, and you're going to have to try to ask folks to put them in there. So just kind of thinking about that too, that is another really big thing about having a repository.
I could go on and on with you all today, but we are already over time. But I'm so glad that we got to that question and we were able to talk a little bit about repos. Great conversation. I knew this was going to be so much fun. I think we got through a lot of really great topics and gave people some really, specific actionable strategies that they can take back to their teams. So thank you all for joining today. And Ben, back over to you.